Again, I'm Andy Kuchins with the Center for Eurasian, Russian, East European Studies. And our last panel, Central Asia and its neighbors, really in the context of the title of the conference, this is where we really look at the greater Eurasia, or we talk more about Eurasia in a way, focusing more on the neighbors. The term Eurasia has had many different incarnations. It was already alluded to by Ambassador Herbst, the British geographer Halford Mackinder in 1904 talked about the world island, and whoever rules Eurasia rules the world. Then in the 1920s we had the Eurasianists, emigre Russian philosophers and thinkers who have kind of reemerged in the last few years in the context of one kind of version of Russian nationalism. And then often the post-Soviet space. Eurasia has often been a synonym for the post-Soviet space, or even the Russian Empire, I suppose. But the way I think about Eurasia is really in more like the supercontinent, from Europe to Asia, from Russia to India, including the greater Middle East, Southeast Asia, etc. Really, the world island. And I think this is where we'll bring in this kind of perspective on Central Asia and how its larger neighbors and some smaller neighbors view it. I think, I ran a project at CSIS a few years ago called Reconnecting Eurasia, and actually developed a new class at Georgetown this fall called Reconnecting Eurasia that looks at this concept. And I think, to put it in a nutshell, I think the question about whether the potential for Eurasia reconnecting will boil down to put it overly simplistically, I think, geopolitical, and strategic interests that may contradict or constrain the logic of economic and commercial interests. So we have a terrifically diverse panel, both from where they're from and also their background. And let me just briefly introduce them. You have the full biographies, of course, in the program. Our first speaker, we welcome Mr. Baurzhan Bektemirov, who came from London, apparently, but he spends most of his time in Astana. But he's been the managing director of the Astana International Financial Center Authority, a remarkably interesting and ambitious project by Kazakhstan, and he provides direction to the center's overall development strategy, economic research agenda, and advises the governor on economic issues and oversees the promotion of financial technologies in the region. I can't help but to mention, but the governor of the Astana International Financial Center did spend a year at the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown back in the 1990s. But Bauer's background is really in banking and finance. And so I think he'd bring a unique perspective to these issues. Our second speaker, Dr. Avi Idan, is a political geographer with a regional focus on Russia, the Caucasus, and Central Asia. He teaches political geography and geostrategy at the University of Haifa in Israel. And he worked for about 30 years in positions in Israeli Prime Minister's office, including 7 years he spent in Moscow in the late 80s and early 1990s, a particularly interesting time. So Avi will be our second speaker. And our third speaker, Dr. Lanxin, he is a professor of international history and politics at the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies in Geneva. He was previously Henry A. Kissinger Chair of Foreign Policy and International Affairs of the Library of Congress, a very prestigious position. And he's held other very prestigious positions as well. You can read more about them. But I think most relevant to this conversation is that since 2015, he has been the director of Center of One Belt, One Road, and Eurasian Security at the Chinese National Institute for SCO Studies in Shanghai, his hometown. And I'll also mention Lanxin is one of my oldest and dearest friends. We were graduate students together and even roommates at Johns Hopkins SAIS in Washington. So we've had many very frank conversations. I expect one more this afternoon. So let me turn the floor over to Mr. Bektemirov.
Okay, thanks. Yes, as Idan just mentioned, actually I don't have experience in banking finance. I always think of myself as an economist. And here we talk about, I want to talk more about the economic substance and the economic cooperation of these countries. And obviously you cannot talk about Asia or Central Asia as C5 only, because I know whether we talk about, we've just talked this morning about how rich in minerals, how rich in resources the countries are, and it is, for us, it is necessary to work with the rest of the world. It's necessary to work with nearest neighbors, Russia, China, work with Europe, work with US, obviously, because this is the only way to move forward. And that's why, for example, we always hear a lot of encouragement for recent Uzbek reforms on opening the borders, being more open to global society, the global financial circles, global global economy. And we, even this during the lunch, we've had this hints of, I would say, criticism, at least, doubt about the rightness of the policy when you seclude yourself and not participating in the integrational process. So yeah, so obviously these processes are important for us and Belt and Road Initiative, and I guess Dr. Xiang will talk more about Belt and Road, or I can also spend a couple of minutes just talking about how Eurasian Economic Union is important for us, and whether it's for Kazakhstan or Kyrgyzstan, even for countries which are not part of the Economic Union, like Uzbekistan. Because this is more about markets being open, having open markets, having access to the markets. But what's hindering, there's a big problem, and I think Mr. Reed just did half of the things that I was going to talk, is about the challenges, the barriers that we have and that we have to overcome. And they will not be overcome in 1 year, in 2 years, and we're struggling with diversification economy, with integrating to global economy for 25 years now, since the dissolution of the Soviet Union. But there are things that can be solved and I think can be achieved on both intergovernmental level on the Central Asia and also on more global level with how we deal with the partners and with other countries. Obviously, such initiative like accession to WTO, which Kyrgyzstan has done and Kazakhstan has been approved, or participation in OECD and just working with the C countries, working with international organizations, international alliances, is very important for Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, all alike. And just looking at my notes, I think one big problem that we had is institutional problem. I mean, we've been part of the Soviet Union. We've been having these institutions set for 70 years, and we kind of continued on them to some extent in the past 20 years, even with all the reforms on liberalization of the economy, of moving towards market economy, we still had some problems. One of the things that we're trying to achieve, what, for example, Uzbekistan is trying to do is opening the borders, being more active, changing the monetary policy, changing a number of other economic policies. The same we did, for example, a few years ago in Kazakhstan, we actually liberalized the monetary policy. And what we're doing right now at the Astana International Financial Center is trying to establish new institutions. And we believe that that's why, hence it's international financial center. This is not even regional financial center. This is, of course, the big ambition. But the goal of this project is not per se to try to become second London or whatever, to replicate the big financial centers, but to adapt international practices, to adapt international rules, and in effect institutions. That's why we said from the very beginning that we ought to have independent jurisdiction, we ought to have independent legal framework that will be based on the rules familiar to investors, because at the end of the day we need more investors, we need more capital coming to the region. This is why we, for example, said we have a special jurisdiction, we have the financial court, we have the arbitration center, and as Mr. Reed just was mentioning half an hour ago, that we have to do something with revolving investment disputes or with problems with intellectual property. We're trying to address that, and what we're hoping to become is not only a Kazakh center of excellence, whatever, but become this focal point for cooperation in the region. That's why we are, for example, taking very active role in Belt and Road Initiative, and I think It was mentioned this morning by our ambassador that the BRI initiative was first announced in Kazakhstan. And last year, during the Shanghai Organization for Cooperation meeting, President Xi actually stressed out that he supports the idea of having a national center, having this market where Chinese institutions, Russian institutions, local institutions, domestic institutions, Western institutions can come together and work. And I think one example of this cooperation has already been the stock exchange that we just launched recently. We haven't had the first transaction yet, but it's ready to host the first transaction. And the strategic partners for the stock exchange are NASDAQ and Shanghai. And I think this is the first place where actually two big exchanges coming to one place. Actually, we have Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, one of our partners as well. And this is funny because this is cybersecurity, and this was for us was very important to involve Israelis on cybersecurity. But anyway, so this is just an example of how we're trying to move forward, how we're trying to work. And with this, I believe it was discussed last week on the C5 meeting that it can become also the local market, because what we're trying to do to liberalize the economy, privatize assets, and Astana International Exchange would be the go-to platform for the privatization program. And what we are also offering to our neighbors, to our partners like Russians, also to host their trades on our stock exchange. And we had this agreement with Moscow Stock Exchange. We're discussing how it can be done. And for a medium-sized company, let's say from Novosibirsk, it's actually cheaper and more convenient to come to Astana than go to Moscow, which is more costly. And this is the truth. I mean, obviously, it's a long way to establish ourselves as such a center, but this is what we're trying to do. And the same for Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, because Kazakhstan, we want to be the local leader, but by leader, I don't mean this like hegemonic power. They're trying to be the largest and the most important, but this is more about leading the reforms and leading this dialogue, or what's called like this cooperation. And that's why we're actively working with local partners. And the president has mentioned it, I think last week, and we've prepared special documents on that, and the memos on how we can be really a local center for other countries. And I've been in a few weeks ago, I was in Azerbaijan. We've met with people there and just explaining what opportunities this cooperation could bring to the countries in the region. So, yes, and I just mentioned on different programs, we have to be more liberal. We have to go on privatization. This is actually one of the commitments of the government, to be more to decrease the share of government on the local market, because we still have this I think legacy of the planet economy from the Soviet past, that government is still very present. And I think this afternoon we also heard about the problems that the barriers for the international investors to work with the private market, because there are always government companies, there are always SOEs which are taking the initiative, but also kind of crowding out, as the economists would say, crowding out the private investment. So we're trying to change that as well. So this is very shortly what we're trying to do and what we are hoping to achieve. Obviously, we need to work with partners which are next door, like China and Russia. And for example, with China on the Belt and Road, we are trying to establish something like an infrastructure investment facilitation office, just like the Hong Kong has done a couple of years ago. I was there at the launching of this office. But this is to be more indeed practical. Actually, we can work there, we can raise capital there, we can actually structure deals there. Because when it comes to multinational projects like Belt and Road, like roads, when it comes to disputes, it's always a problem, because how you resolve it, how you come together to one table with three countries, and where would who is how is this Russian saying, who are the judges? So we have to solve this, and we are offering this place, and I hope that this will be one step closer to cooperation in the region, and also this global cooperation, which is important for our countries.
Thank you very much, Bauer. That was really, really informative about the ambitions of the Astana International Financial Center and regional economic cooperation. Before I turn to Avi, I was amiss in my introduction, and I should note that one of our panelists is not here. You probably noticed, Dr. Ivan Safranchuk from Moscow. His flight on Aeroflot was canceled rather prematurely, I think, but that's what happened. And Monday afternoon, and we were not able to find him another flight that would get him in time here for the conference. And what makes us so grateful that Bauer and Lanxin were able to make it, because on Monday afternoon things looked a little tough for the conference. This might have been a really depleted panel, just me and Avi. So I may make some comments about Russia from my perspective, and even the United States, if time allows. Avi.
In the 2.5 decades since the independence of the states of Central Asia, the region has undergone several geopolitical transformations, many which resulted from the change in policies of the global and regional powers active in the region. And you can guess what is my direction. Central Asia seems to be currently undergoing one more of these significant geopolitical changes due to the impact of China's Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI, project on the region. One of the most significant factors impacting Central Asia and its landlocked is its landlocked geography. Central Asia's landlocked situation affects almost every sphere of life: foreign policy, national security, economy, and even human development trends. However, China's BRI, Belt and Road Initiative project, may alter the impact of Central Asia's landlocked geography on the region. China BRI can transform Central Asia from a landlocked to a transit region between Asia and Europe. And essentially, I would say that China is unlocking the landlocked Central Asian and even beyond the Caspian region. From the beginning of their independence, the leaders of the new states of Central Asia recognized and articulate the limitation of the landlocked geography, and sought increased transportation and connectivity as a means to deal with this handicap. President Nazarbayev, in his first address to Kazakhstani nation after independence in 1991, quote, "The lack of direct outlet to the open seas and communicative resources make the Republic participation in the international economic relations difficult. It's essential that Kazakhstan," this is Nazarbayev, "it's essential that Kazakhstan secure for itself access to the sea. Without it," he continued, "Kazakhstan will find itself in a dependent position, which could undermine not only its economic, but also political independence." President Karimov of Uzbekistan wrote during the first years of independence, and quote, "World experience testifies, and Uzbekistan is another proof, that a country having no access to international waters significantly suffers in international economics. This is why we continue to seek, it means Uzbekistan, this is why we continue to seek new solutions to the problem of providing our export with an effective transportation system and obtaining access to international waters. It's essential that Uzbekistan secure for itself unimpeded access to the sea." And just to mention that Kazakhstan is one of the 2 double landlocked countries in the world. The other one is Liechtenstein. Understanding the approach of the leaders to addressing confines of their landlocked geography helps to explain why the states of the region have embraced China's BRI and do not see it as a threatening, as we could see, by the way, in the morning session from the ambassadors of the region. The BRI offers the states of Central Asia opportunity to solve a problem they defined from early independence. The BRI integrates the countries of Central Asia with a new multi-direction transportation network, as well as connecting Central Asia to faraway countries and markets. The BRI, OBOR, this is the first name of the project, One Belt, One Road, then it can become BRI. The BRI, according to Chinese estimates, will encompass approximately 65 countries and improve connectivity over an area that produces approximately 55% of the global GDP, and it includes close to 70% of the population of the world. In the BRI scheme, Central Asia becomes the main continental gates for Chinese transportation routes westward. As such, an area that was isolated, I mean Central Asia, an area that was isolated, cut off, and landlocked, turned into a transit region of great importance to China, as well as to other nations. I would now like to point out several geopolitical trends resulting from this change in the region. One, the intensification of the win-win basis of the relations between Central Asian countries and China. The BRI is currently China's main policy vector. It now will need to deepen ties with the states of Central Asia, and while Chinese influence will grow in Central Asia, the reverse arrow works as well, and China's dependence on good ties and cooperation with the region grows as well. Two, the rise in the importance of the Central Asian countries. Central Asia will be more integrated with China's western provinces and significantly contributes to the development of this part of China. This can lead to greater two-way influence between these two regions with potential political implications. In addition, China is now very interested in stability in Central Asia, which will become a precondition to the success of the BRI. Three, intensification of Chinese security involvement in Central Asia. Chinese security and potentially even military involvement in the region may grow. The geographic role of Central Asia within the frame of the BRI makes this region key to the success of the project. Central Asia's security challenges, mainly currently threats from the violent fundamental Islamic sources, can be expected to lead to increased Chinese security presence and maybe even active military involvement in the area. The building of the first Chinese military base outside of China in Djibouti on the Red Sea is the first sign of trend that can be expected to characterize Chinese conduct in critical places like Central Asia. China's economic and political influence may not be enough to ensure stability in the area. Chinese current activity both in Afghanistan and in the area of Tajikistan is an indication of the security trends. 4, Russia and China in the new connectivity reality. The growing importance of the transportation system in Central Asia, and as a result, the significance of the security stability in this area, all contain elements that strengthen the common interest of these two superpowers in Central Asia. Russia now sees this area as a barrier against threat from the radical Islam into Russian territory, and China has now begun to develop a growing interest in the security of the Central Asian region as a whole, and not only along Western Chinese border. In addition, China's need for the use of the BRI maritime routes through Russian maritime territory in the Arctic region, up in the Arctic, also contributes to expanded Russian-Chinese cooperation in Central Asia. 5, growth of the importance of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO. So the SCO is an effective platform both for the new pattern of activity for China in Central Asia, and for a coordinated framework for Russia and Chinese cooperation in the area. BRIs includes the connection of China and Central Asia to potential access to the Indian Ocean through the port of Gwadar in Pakistan, down from Kashgar, if someone knows the range, from Kashgar down to the Indian Ocean near Karachi. The recent inclusion of India and Pakistan in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization reflects the growing influence of the BRI on the focus and the activity of the organization. Here you can see on the map, this is something very crucial if it's going to be implemented. You can see from Kashgar down to Pakistan along to the port of Gwadar. And it might give the Central Asian countries a very important outlet to the Indian Ocean, not just for the Black Sea or the Mediterranean. The BRI connects Central Asia to new regions such as the Mediterranean region and to Iran, and also creates linkages between these regions. And if I can add, as a native of the seaport of Haifa, somewhere small place that you hardly can see it on the map, China has designated an important role for Israel in the maritime route of the BRI. Israel's geographic location places it on an important route in between the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea as a secure alternative to the Suez Canal. Israel enables a reliable access for the BRI maritime route from the east. Thus, Israel's ties with Central Asia are poised to grow under the BRI. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Avi. Very informative, and I think it sets the stage nicely for Lanxin.
Thank you for... Does it work? Yeah, it does. Well, it's always a disadvantage of speaking last because the good stuff been talked about already, especially the last speaker gave us such a comprehensive view on Belt and Road Initiative. So I think I have to make a quick adjustment simply speaking something from what I perceive to be the Chinese leadership's perspective. Couple of points I want to make. First, why are they so committed to this project? I don't want to go back to the origins in detail. I simply want to say there are economic motivations, there are geopolitical motivations, but it's certainly that the Chinese national interests, they thought about this for a long time. This is not something new or recent, because I would put the date sometime around 2003, 2004. That's the time when the Chinese leadership, for the first time, they began to realize that Eurasian continent is somewhere they can, build a new strategy. The trigger for that strategy, at that point, is the UN Security Council split over the war. The Anglo-Americans on one side, then you have the continental Europeans. We have a very unique situation which Chinese never seen before. You have Berlin, Paris, Moscow, and Beijing join hands to create a kind of diplomatic entente, at least for a while. And at that point, I believe Chinese leaders began to think, well, this is something new we haven't seen before. We used to think the West is a monolith. They may have differences, but they're not going that far, just over one issue. This is the beginning of thinking of a Euro-Asian strategy. Now, over the next few years, I think what's happening is that Chinese began to evaluate what are the conditions on the Euro-Asian landmass. This is, of course, Mackindor's heartland. This is historically is where all the conflicts, international conflicts, took place. But in the after 2003, 2004, the Chinese increasingly realized that the Eurasian continent, for the first time, there is absence of major strategic rivalries among great powers. So this is another, additional chance, thinking if there is no major military confrontation or potential military confrontation, this is a great opportunity for China. The third point, from a geopolitical point of view, I would argue, has to do with the U.S.-China policy, of course. Chinese, since Kissinger-Nixon time, the foreign policy orientation is almost exclusively towards the Pacific. Okay. Chinese policy elite has this well-known internal saying, whatever happens in the world, Washington, Beijing can't get anything settled, no problem. Other issues are insignificant. Of course, between China and the United States, the most difficult issue is Taiwan. We used to say we have three major problems between U.S. and China: Taiwan, and Taiwan. But nobody knows how to resolve that problem. Taiwan issue, remember, during that period, come up very often with the Taiwanese independence movement. So the U.S.-China relations fluctuate quite a bit. At that point, there are suggestions saying we need a new strategy toward the West to rebalancing. We started rebalancing earlier than Obama, in fact, to rebalancing the overly emphasis on the Pacific Asian side. So this is, I think, this is what the evolution of that strategic thinking. I don't want to take some credit, but I did write a very long essay at that point in 2004. It's called Euro-Asian Experiment. China needs a Euro-Asian experiment. 3 years later, another scholar from Beijing University who actually called it, we need a new Western strategy. So this is the way how the thinking. But in any case, this is one reason they are really, this is part of the geostrategic considerations. a very important one. It's a major shift in that sense. Now, economic reason for that, I don't think is difficult to explain. But it's often ignored is the domestic economic reasons. Because the Western press usually emphasize on Chinese overseas expansion part of the story. But there are, real domestic reasons for this kind of project. One, of course, is exporting overcapacity, because remember, China after 2008, they began to realize that the trade-based economic growth or the export-led growth model eventually is going to run into difficulty. We are already running into it right now. There is a need for a conscious strategy of transforming that model into a domestic consumption model. It is during this period Chinese massively spend in the domestic infrastructure. For those who've been to China, 20 years ago, hardly highways is not quite a common thing. You see how much they do the last 20 years with infrastructure, transportation in particular. Now, but in that massive infrastructure building also create a huge overcapacity. So there is a need for exporting overcapacity instead of simply exporting goods, manufactured goods. There is another reason I think is being ignored by the Western commentators. Is China has a long established strategy called the Western Development Strategy. That's more than 20 years during Jiang Zemin period already. The idea is to correct this economic development balance between coastal area, because most of our economic growth actions are in coastal area during Deng Xiaoping's reform. Because coastal area, the special economic zones take something like 60% of GDP. Then the inland, especially western part of China, way behind. So there has been a strategy called the Western Development Strategy, but that strategy did not work, or at least achieve very little. So this idea to extend that original, not very successful development strategy cross the border into a relatively safe foreign environment, it's the idea also to help that Western development strategy to work. So this is, obvious reasons there. There is a third reason I would argue almost totally ignored by Western commentators is Chinese internal banking and financial reforms. They need what I would call external discipline to discipline something they cannot discipline themselves. Since I live in Europe, I always use Italy as my favorite example. Italians never qualified for Euro, in 2000s. But Italian leaders are very, very clever. They insist on we must be there. We are founding members of the Treaty of Rome. Because Italians are using the same strategy to discipline something their internal economic system cannot. Chinese banking system is notorious for lacking of discipline, I must say. It's only recent couple of years, I will say, actually now, the banking system really begin very serious disciplinary actions. Discipline meaning to make our financial actions, monetary actions, more compatible with a market mechanism rather than intransparency. So this is actually in the mind of the leadership, saying this is something it's experiment. We want to see. Chinese, don't forget, Chinese had no experience in international financing. They're taking upon such a big project, which involving 65 countries. Now, remember, in our projection, the Belt and Road project probably will at least 30 years in length, between 8, maybe even 10. We don't even know how $1 trillion. That's the projection. But if you don't have a serious, professional, technically competent group who knows how to leverage financing, because this is not foreign aid, it's not foreign direct investment either. The idea is to use this as a jumpstart point to leverage financing those projects, hoping international financiers, including, particularly in the West, we hope Europeans in particular, Juncker, for example, Juncker plan, right? Chinese is fascinated by Juncker fund, saying, well, if they want to match with us, that's wonderful. I talked to Juncker people as well on this. They are enthusiastic, at least for a while. So this is, this is something I think is very important to keep in mind. I always have the feeling that when talk about Belt and Road Project, there is very different reactions. Since I've been doing this think tank in Shanghai, I at least give 25, almost, I don't remember how many talks on this. I go to Central Asia, go to Eastern Europe, Africa. The reaction's always, what's in for me, right? That's the, they are thinking this is a foreign direct investment. No, it's not. Okay. Then I go to Europe. Europeans say, we are very much interested, but we want to know how it works because we're not sure. Okay. Coming to Washington, this is at least the third time I talk about this. There's always the reaction is, tell me the truth. What's behind what geopolitical, intention. What's they care less about what the nitty gritty, what this is all about. So I think there is a need for me as a running a think tank, for Chinese side at least, to explain it very clearly. So far, this is not very successful, I must say. They're using these concepts which, to me, do not make much sense. Silk Road, it's very misleading. I don't like that word to describe Belt and Road Initiative. Silk Road historically is a trading system where Chinese never really trade with the ultimate consumer, who are in Europe. We always use middlemen. This is what today's Persians are, the Iranians and the Afghans, Central Asians. Okay. So these concepts are very, very weird. It's not very effective. And the other concept, I disagree. I engage a lot of debates within China. They say this is a symphony, not a solo, meaning they want other people to join. But don't forget, they're using Western concept symphony. Symphony, you have a conductor who controls everything. I mean, sounds like almost like it's a super solo. But that concept doesn't work. Europeans, Germans even, recently Germans began to worry about this concept. Then I would argue, since you have talked all about the benefits and so on, I being politically incorrect, saying we have a lot of challenges, actually. Number one challenge, think about Central Asia alone. I think security is a major problem. The C5 they had a wonderful relation with China, I'm sure. I mean, but are their system really stable next 5 years, 6 years? When you invest in huge projects like highway, railway, and those projects, you always want to know, medium term, or what's going to happen. That is internal stability issue. It's, the other issue is security of the project itself. Who protect those projects? Pakistan is the only country who, straightforward, they offer 2 armed divisions for this, Sino-Pakistan economic corridor. Now, who is going to protect Chinese projects in in Africa, in Central Asia? May be better, but still, where the security? Chinese now in China on the BRA project, private security becomes such a huge business. The guy called a Blackwater guy, whose sister is education secretary, who actually moved to Hong Kong because he is very quick. He realized there is a huge opportunity. All these Chinese companies need those type of thing because they don't have other alternative. We cannot send our guard units to protect those projects. So there are a lot of challenges, but the biggest challenge, let me just end up saying that really the biggest challenge is the leverage financing, whether or not Chinese can do it. I would think the real bottleneck for the BRI project is lack of investment banking talents. This is the biggest deficit. We simply don't have. Our bankers, central bankers, Chicago School, which is bad news to begin with. They are literally trained in Chicago, by the way. So this is I don't think they really know, that well. There is an enormous gap, in other words, to have people who understand international banking and investment, because Chinese had never done this before. Okay. The last point, just quickly, is Chinese leadership still committed? Yes. I know Western commentators pay a lot of attention to Xi Jinping's changing constitution, a lifetime presidency, so on and so forth. But there's one thing I just remind you to pay attention to vis-a-vis the Belt and Road project. Number one, Belt and Road project actually written into party charter, the 19th Party Congress, which means what? Of course, means huge commitment from Xi Jinping point of view, but also means there is enormous constraint on him because he cannot fail. If you written into, it's the second development is the constitution. The most recently, the other side of the story aside, but I'm simply saying they put the concept for the first time, so-called common human destiny. This, what the Chinese say, what we build, Belt and Road, ultimate objective to build common human destiny, right? That concept is written into the Constitution, which is very good news for Belt and Road project, obviously. At least meaning that this support from the state. Now, whether it's going to be successful or not, I think is everybody's guess. There are a lot of pessimistic views. There are a lot of moderate views, but I have not seen a single Chinese elite who is totally optimistic, saying this is going well, everything is fine. No, can't be, because it's a learning process for a long time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lanxin. The point that you made about the messaging, public relations issue is one that in my class in the fall, I have two Chinese students. The two of them convinced the rest of us, including the professor, that this is indeed a serious problem with the Belt and Road Initiative. And in fact, one of them wrote the research paper, particularly about this issue in regard to Central Asia. It's quite good. So we've heard from an historian, a geographer, and an economist, and I'm a political scientist. That's sort of oxymoronic category. I'll make a few comments about Russia, since our Russian colleague could not be here. I think Eurasia, for Russia, in the post-Soviet context, they tend to think of Eurasia as the post-Soviet space, and so it's a more limited understanding, and this is, as Dmitry Medvedev, when he was president in 2008, described this as Russia's zone of privileged interests. And I think there's not a great amount of enthusiasm in Moscow about multi-vector foreign policies, because multi-vector foreign policies are essentially primarily catalyzed by creating alternatives to dependence and leverage on Russia in the context of beginning in the 1990s. And as a corollary of that, the U.S. policy of happiness is multiple pipelines was certainly not received very popularly by the Russians as well, since these pipelines, the ones that were built, particularly in the 1990s, were the ones that we supported were to diversify the dependence of some of the new independent states from the Soviet legacy pipeline infrastructure. It's interesting, though, in the pipelines, in that if you look at the pipelines that were built in the 1990s, new ones, from Russia, Central Asia, the Caspian Basin, they all went west. Beginning in the 2000s, they all went east. And I think this reflects the extent to which China in particular, has usurped the dominant economic role that Russia had in Central Asia over the course of the last 15 or 20 years. Russia's accepted this, I think, with a great degree of equanimity, but I think there's a lot of ambivalence on their part about it. More recently, in the last three to five, particularly since Crimea and Ukraine, with increasing alienation from the West, Russians will talk about this kind of informal division of labor, where the Chinese handle the economic side, and Russia handles sort of the managing the politics and the geopolitics of Central Asia. Now, obviously, this is not a perspective that is appreciated by the Central Asians themselves, but I would say from the standpoint of the China-Russia relationship, usually the flag follows money. And increasingly, China's political influence in Central Asia has increased with its economic presence. But I'm not one that is particularly concerned about the possibility of a significant China-Russia dispute about Central Asia, primarily because, one, this is a secondary or tertiary foreign policy interest of both countries, and two, I think the desire for political stability for each country is still overweening and more powerful. Now, just a word about the Eurasian Economic Union, and I guess what was initially the Silk Road Economic Belt. And it's interesting, in May 2015, when President Putin and President Xi, when they met in China, they came to an agreement about cooperation between the Eurasian Economic, well, then it was still the Customs Union, and then the Silk Road Economic Belt. Now, actually, it was the Eurasian Economic Union at that time, excuse me. Yeah, in 2015, May 2015. What does this actually mean? We still don't know what it actually means, but I think on one level for the Chinese, I think it meant that the Russians were basically kind of giving their okay to the Silk Road Economic Belt project and the Belt and Road Initiative, despite the fact that they have a lot of ambivalence about it. I think this ambivalence is reflected in the fact that the Russians were one of the late joiners of the AIIB, very late joiners. Now, on the Eurasian Economic Union, just a couple of words. I mean, this is certainly not a project to re-Sovietize the region, as then Secretary Clinton said in December 2011. But there's no question that the institution, in the eyes of Mr. Putin, when he first talked about it in October of 2011, is something to advance Russian economic and political influence in the region. And probably his ambitions are greater than what has been the reality so far. And of course, there's been pushback, particularly from the Kazakhs and Mr. Nazarbayev, about trying to ensure that this is an economic institution and not a political institution. Now, I think there's a tendency in Washington to dismiss the institution. Often it's like how we approach Russia. Either we overly inflate Russia's threat or we underestimate Russia's influence. With the Eurasian Economic Union, let's remember, okay, when it was first formed, January 2015, this is right after the oil price had halved, the ruble depreciated by 100%. This had a tremendous knock-on effect in Kazakhstan. And so the economic conditions in which the Eurasian Economic Union were born were very, very complicated and difficult. I mean, the larger point I would want to make is that, look, Yeshoni Vecher, these are early days for this institution. And I think the point that was made this morning, that there's been considerable progress on two areas of cooperation, while issues of finance and services, remain very complicated. Well, that's not unusual. That you'd expect that in any multilateral trade and economic organization. And my feeling always about the Eurasian Economic Union, if the Russians are going to really treat it as as an instrument of political control and hegemony, then it will be destined to failure like many others over the course of the post-Soviet period. A couple last points that bring in the United States. I mean, just to emphasize, I spent a lot of time in Central Asia in 2014 and 2015 in particular, and this was right in the wake, of course, of Crimea, the war in the Donbass, and poor U.S.-Russian relations really complicate the desires of Central Asian states, other states bordering on Russia, their desires to exercise a multi-vector foreign policy. And it's really not in our interest to push those states too hard to do something that they don't really want to do. And just as an example, I remember coming into the office in July of 2014 of the then Prime Minister of Kyrgyzstan, who was an old friend, and the first thing he said to me was, "Andy, can you tell the people at the State Department to stop telling us to not join the Eurasian Economic Union?" And he went through the reasons as to why they're going to do it, and they see it's in their interests. That's it. Finally, just a quick word on your question to Mr. Reed earlier, Lanxin, about Indo-Pacific strategy. I spent a lot of time in the fall working on a scholarly journal article, which means, of course, that by the time it comes out, it'll be very much overtaken by events. But the title of it is, What is Eurasia to us? And I'm trying to go through what is, with the U.S., kind of a play on words, the U.S. How have we thought about Eurasia since the collapse of the Soviet Union? What have our policies been? But I looked at the Trump administration rhetoric and position on both the AIIB and more so on the broader strategy. You know, it's the main things to look at are a speech by then Secretary of State Tillerson at CSIS in the fall, and then the publication of the National Security Strategy in December. I got to tell you, those documents read like they're straight out of, Mackinder or Nicholas Speakman. I mean, this is sea power versus continental land power. And the continental land powers are the great powers. Russia likes to be put in the same category as China. The great power adversaries, these great power land powers that are authoritarian, et cetera, et cetera. It's really straightforward. Now, how much this actually means for policy is a big question mark, but it's there. And what's also notable is you look at the evolution of how Trump administration officials, in the first 6 months coming to power, they were pretty ambivalent about the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. That changed dramatically over the summer and into the fall. And you see this reflected both in statements and in documents that are, I think, quite hostile, overly hostile, in my view, to the bank. So with that, we have a little more than 25 minutes for questions and answers. Why don't we open it up to the floor? Vadim Grishin.
Thank you very much for interesting conversation. I have a couple of questions. The first one to Mr. Bektemirov regarding international or regional financial center. There are different models of international centers. We know about this. And you can develop software, infrastructure, hardware. You can be offshore or inshore. And it's pretty challenging if you create regional center. So in your case, you're thinking about offshore financial center or inshore? And my second question to Mr. Xiang. You said that we should pay attention to internal factors when we analyze OBOR initiative, and it's true. But we know that China, roughly, has two parts, rather developing eastern part and less developing western part. In this case, in case of Central Asia projects, this road passed through the western part of China. This part, or these provinces, are involved in OBOR initiative, or they also play a role of transit corridor? And we are talking about overcapacity of eastern provinces, mostly. Thank you.
Bauer?
Yeah, should I go? Yep. I mean, of course, this is to some extent it's a very unique model because we're actually setting up a new island jurisdiction. We're implementing a different independent legal system, and the status was even reflected in the constitution. There aren't many examples in the world of countries which did that. Obviously, we're in the first, and then we modeled a lot of things from Dubai. But what Dubai did, they actually made an offshore center in Dubai, and it was not connected to the local financial market. There were 2 stock exchanges which were not connected, and to some extent, the development of local capital market, and Dubai has failed in developing local capital markets. And from very beginning, our need to create this financial center was coming from the domestic demand because we have enough financial capital, we have a lot of savings, and there's actually a surplus of savings over investment, and we understood that we need to reboot local financial system, and then came idea that we have to do it to attract foreign investors, to make it international, to make have rules, etc. So to some extent, initially it was like an onshore, within financial center, but then since we're implementing different rules in different jurisdictions, it came, and then we've borrowed the offshore model. So we'd like to call it midshore, and we just discussed this recently, a couple of days ago, with the governor. I think good example is what we're trying to be is something like Hong Kong in China. It's like one country, 2 systems. So this would be the closest example of what we're trying to do. And I know it's hard to call Hong Kong an offshore center, and they're definitely not onshore. So it's something. This is combined model, and I would definitely not offshore, and definitely are separated from the local system just by our rules and principles. So sorry for this indefinite answer, but it's not neither offshore nor onshore.
Well, and it's very early days. The project just officially started in January.
Yes, so we just launched it this January. We just opened it. We have first applications, and we're gonna have this big presentation inauguration on July 5th. But actually, if you don't mind, I want to make one comment on the Eurasian Economic Union to what you were talking about. Sure. You mentioned 2015. I would like to go back to, I guess, 2009, 2010, and then when the need of customs union arose, because this is post-global financial crisis, and this is the time when actually Chinese were very active. You remember the Chinese after global financial crisis for investing very aggressively in Africa, but also in our region. They made a lot of investment in our ports, in our oil industry, and so this customs union was to some extent stabilizing the poles to some extent. And when you just mentioned that in 2015 it was just giving okay to Belt and Road, I don't think it was at that point, because this was inevitable anyway. Yeah. And that's why we're trying to, the president, and we're always trying to stress the economic union, because it's not political, because we don't want it to be political. Russia may think differently, of course. We don't want it to be political. We want to make it really economic, to also balance the presence of Chinese. And to some extent, it has played a role. And if you look at the, export-import geography, especially import geography, before and after customs union, we have a big shift from China to Russia. And we started to, I think, I might be wrong at this moment, but I think when they're comparing numbers in 2009, 2011, it was like at 10 percentage points increase in imports from Russia. So this is just an example. This is really working in terms of stabilizing this multi-vectoral economic policy. I'm not talking about political, economic policy. So yeah, so this is just a quick comment to what you said.
That's a valuable point. Lanxin?
Yes, the answer to your question is yes. My understanding is 14 central and the western provinces officially designate as part of the Belt and Road project, which means they are unique. They are in a unique position to get government funding if they have, project and so on. So it's clearly.
Yeah, and if we look at the map, I think we would. If you look at the map, we will see that
the map is a wonderful map.
Yeah, we're at Urumqi actually on the map.
Yes. Urumqi is one of the center point for this. We were just there a couple months ago. Yes.
Okay. Yes, Medina.
Thank you to the panelists. So I also have two questions. First, Dr. Xiang, you said that China doesn't have much experience of the kind of investments it wants to do under BRI, but China has long invested across Africa and Latin America and in Asia as well. So I wonder how exactly BRI investments would differ from those. And to Mr. Bektemirov, in terms of role of Astana Financial Center in accelerating privatization in Kazakhstan and promoting rule of law, I wonder how exactly you imagine that, because as I understand, those multinational companies will be working within the zone of Astana Financial Center, so how is that going to spill over into the rest of the economy? And if the government did want more privatization, it could have done that on the platform of Kazakhstan Stock Exchange, so how Astana Financial Center would differ from KASA? Thank you.
These are very two different kind of investment. Don't forget, Africa and Latin America is China's direct foreign direct investment. Now, the Belt and Road, so far, Chinese government clever enough never call it project. They use the term initiative. They stick to that. Initiative means you go to a place, you initiate a project, you need local, investment as well. I mean, Kazakhstan have done a lot in this area as well. It's, that's the condition for, now Chinese really hope is to be able to leverage financing from other parts of the world, as in the sense of Panama Canal, Suez, think about 19th century experience, kind of maybe too ambitious, but that's the idea. You understand what I mean? So it's not foreign direct investment. In Africa, that's a totally different project. Chinese wholly owned, usually.
Can I just follow up on that point, Lanxin? Yeah. Because if you look at the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank, I mean, it's been remarkably successful in how it has developed. Actually, Sergei Guriev, the AIB, is to norms and standards, but the AIB capitalization and their funding for BRI projects is far less than that of state-owned banks. Chinese Development Bank, Import Bank. And those banks are more problematic and would seem to be more difficult to attract other international partners. But it's a hypothesis.
But that's exactly what Chinese wish to. You see, AIB is set as an example for those kind of projects, which is according to transparency, rules of the game. China does not control AIB. Number two guy is a German guy. I talked to him. He said, "Well, it's a very free discussion. There is no, arm twisting." And so, by the way, so far they only approve a couple of small projects, AIB, because it's a tough procedure. But we hope that will lead to our, improvement for our own banks in the future. That's the idea. Yes.
And I've heard this.
Yes.
I think complaint from the AIB saying that calling AIB Chinese institutions like calling World Bank the American institutions. So this is they're trying to be multilateral, not Chinese.
Right.
They're claiming to that.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to my point. Yes, we are. I wouldn't say we are accelerating privatization, because privatization is more about the government and some Rukazina state-owned enterprises, their decision. But what we're trying to do is just to give this platform and saying you don't have to go to London, to go to Hong Kong to raise money. And here, this is the big distinction between the local capital market, the CASE, the stock exchange, and the type that we're trying to propose, because this is about regulation. This is about the requirements, the market rules. And if you look at the CASE, the market rules are completely different. They're local. They are, there are requirements on language, there are different requirements for the participants. Then the stock exchange is heavily regulated per se, and then the capital markets. The previous initiative had not been worked for different reasons. I don't think it's also problem of cassette that they did the dual listing, and when you do dual listing on local and when you do it simultaneous local dual listing in Almaty and London, obviously the whole price formation liquidity will be piled up in London. So, but what we're trying to say, we say that we need to develop local capital markets. We need to do privatization in Astana, and I think there's the government support for that we want to do it in Astana. That's why we are bringing the latest infrastructure. We're bringing NASDAQ technology. We're partnering with Euroclear on the post-trade services. We're partnering with some, Tel Aviv, as I mentioned, on cybersecurity. Just saying, in terms of market rules, your governance, at least on the approach will be the same as in London, Hong Kong, but then it will be cheaper, definitely cheaper than London. So this is our view. And on the spillovers, promoting rule of law, etc. Yes, this is true that one could say that everything will be in the FC. It will no effect on other countries. I know there are different mechanisms. There are different structures can allow that. For example, I just give one example. Let's say we want to have portfolio investment. You go through stock exchange. You will have direct investment to a project in South Kazakhstan. You can set up a company that will be that will own the asset, but will be based in Astana, and then you invest in this company from abroad. Like, Chinese Development Bank can invest in a company which is in Astana, but which holds the asset elsewhere, because obviously Astana financial center this is not the asset. There's not underlying economics in the center. But then if you invest there and there is a problem, then you go to dispute resolution. You fall under regulation. You fall under the jurisdiction. If there is any problem with with this investment, then you go to international court, the financial court that we have in Astana. So this is just one of the mechanisms that can be done. And then you can set up SPVs, you can set up different instruments. And this is, we're actually working on that to build this special packages just to come to company and say. But this is opening company that will own the asset and will fall under our jurisdiction and our rules on intellectual property, on the shareholder protection. That's just one instrument, and I think it can work.
Can I
Yeah.
add something that was mentioned here? It's very important to differentiation between project and initiative. And I must say that from my experience in China, and I'm visiting China twice or 3 times a year last year, is that when you talk to people in Beijing, then in Shanghai, and then in Xinjiang, let's say in Urumqi, or Kashgar, whatever, and I'm talking about think tanks as Academy of Science, whatever, you get different ideas and notions about what it's all about. I mean, and it's a challenge for a foreigner, let's say a Westerner, really to understand this is a totally different mindset from what we used to, as you mentioned, the Tel Aviv. There is a project, you have when you start, you end when you finish, you're at the stages, everything. But in this case, it's totally different. And as a geographer, I was trying hard in order to get this map of this, let's say, initiative, project. Who knows? I mean, it was not easy, and in China as well. So this is something, at least in my case, as a researcher, I'm trying to look at it in a totally different way of thinking what I used to look at it from my Western, let's say, culture or whatever. And that's what I...
This is a really interesting point, and maybe Lanxin or Bao might want to respond. But initiative. So where is the initiative coming from for various projects? To what extent is it in Beijing? To what extent it is in some of the regions that will gain from these investments? To what extent is it from the countries outside China that participate in the projects? And how does that process work?
Well, I mean, from our experience, we view this initiative more like the invitation to work, and I think this is also a tremendous opportunity for Central Asian countries, because Chinese, to some extent, need international partners. They need to show to the rest of the world this is not the Chinese project, this is just international initiative. That's why I strongly believe that there's opportunity for Central Asian countries. That's why we are actively participating. And I'm a big advocate of the program, even though there are different views even within Kazakhstan on the growing Chinese presence, because this is, business is business, right? This is where it will bring a lot of good to the economy. That's why we want to be the partner for for AAB, for the Chinese government, for the initiative. That's why we want to set up this infrastructure facilitation, financing facilitation office, because we believe this is something that could benefit the whole region, and Kazakhstan in particular.
Lanxin, do you want to weigh in on this?
Well, initiative, I think it depends on what country you're talking about. In the case of Pakistan, it's a very different project, for variety of reasons. Both sides are so enthusiastic, so you don't need initiative, basically. But some other countries, it's really depends on. I mean, Eastern European countries, for example, they initiated more than Chinese. I'm talking about the new Europe. So Chinese say, okay, let's set up something. It's something called 16+1, right? That's so it's really depending on what circumstances is. It's very difficult to say clearly, but so far, most of these projects are taken by government decision, but also the state enterprises, the big giants, they took the initiative if they think it's profitable. So,
and what would you say about the central authority versus regional authorities?
Regional authority not yet actively engaged. They're on small scale. As I said, we have 14 provinces now officially designated to be part of the project. Those provinces are becoming more active. They want to see if maybe there are some project we can do, take over one project and so on, but not yet. Most of the central state-controlled SOEs at this stage.
If I can add,
yes,
for this point,
yeah.
My impression, if you're asking about let's say when you talk to people in Beijing or in Shanghai, it's one thing, but when you talk about the challenges of the initiative project, in the western provinces of China, you get a totally different reaction. If we are talking about Xinjiang, which is really the gate, this is the gate, the entrance or the exit, depends direction. But so then you really, and these people really, they are closer to Central Asia, and there are some people here, at least a group of people that knows this region from the breakup of the Soviet Union. We know what the challenges of Central Asia are. From security issues, something very serious. And when you are going to establish or to such a huge project in Central Asia, I must say that there are a lot of question marks, and the people, I'm talking about the people who are dealing with this idea in the Academy of Science and some decision makers in, let's say, in Urumqi, in Xinjiang, which is, so then you feel that they have a lot of questions about how it's going to happen, and they really understand how big the challenges are for this, let's say, crossing the Central Asia. Right. It's not easy. So this is very still under big question marks, and that's the reason why I put a question mark when I gave the title for my presentation, because we have the initiative, we have the idea, it can be very beneficial for the states of the region, let's say Central Asia, but still it's too early to really get the picture of what's going on in this area.
But if you go back to the basics, this is infrastructure, this is very long-term investment. Now, if you want to invest in road, you have to wait many years to make it real profitable. And then that's why for the Chinese government, this is my subjective view, I might be wrong, and I don't have confirmation about this view. But for the Chinese government, they really view it as a long-term project. They really view it. Right. They even probably view it as a profitable project in very long term, because they look for 50 years, 40 years. But when it comes to the businesses, when it comes to actually investment decisions, when it comes to private firms, there's always hesitation, because what's the IRR of the project, and how many years do you have to wait to make it profitable? And this is just our basic economic decision whether you want to invest, what's the maturity of the project. And that's why there is this notion of public-private partnership, and that's why, for example, roads in the UK were developed by PPPs. And here we just have to understand what would be the right PPP model for these businesses or for smaller agents undertaking the project and the big project. That's why I guess this is an issue, because this is not FDI. This is something like investment project, which is very long term, and that's why businesses may be not very enthusiastic about that, because there are ways to invest separately. You can invest in Bitcoin. Right. I'm just kidding. But just to add another, forgive me digressing, just to one joke that we repeatedly now tell to each other, that when China talks about win-win projects, it usually means double win for China.
So, and it's not a coincidence that at least officially, if you look at information on the website of the Belt and Road Initiative, that the project ends in 2049, the 100-year anniversary of the Chinese Revolution. Okay, let's go back to the audience. We have time for one or two more. Jeremy.
Okay. Jeremy Regal from Chevron. Thank you very much for us. I have two quick questions. One concerns the India role in all this as well. It seems that geopolitically they're a lot more neutral to Central Asia, right? They don't quite carry the domineering baggage that the Russians or Chinese do. And there's certainly a greater geopolitical initiative on India's part. Very notable what they're trying to do in Iran right now, for instance. Do we see any tangible signs that India is actually serious about playing in Central Asia and increasing their engagement there? And the other on the Belt Road Initiative, regardless of what we call it, I think one of the takeaways from the first few rounds has been that the contracts largely go to the Chinese. And this has also been one of the big roadblocks to advancing Chinese projects in Kazakhstan and other countries in Central Asia, right? I think CSIS did a recent study, and 89% of the contracts, I think they discovered, went to Chinese businesses. So is China starting to understand that there's a greater need to effectively sell local stakeholders on the benefits that they could get from this, more than just the railroad, but also from the contracts, from their own businesses developing as well?
Okay, thank you. I'm thinking we're going to probably have to make this the last question. I'm very pleased that you brought up India, Jeremy. We also had another panelist that was supposed to be here, David Sedney, but he was called to go to India. Was not. We had to pull him off the program. Okay, who would like to start?
India?
Yeah.
Well, India, it's a real challenge. I mean, the BRI initiative is a real challenge for India. I'll focus on one example, which is I think everything is clear. And I mentioned, at least in my presentation, that this corridor going down from Kashgar, from China, down to the Indian Ocean. And it crosses the Kashmir area and the Pakistani. So it's raised the whole issue between Pakistan and Kashmir, between Pakistan and India. And it means that the moment they'll have this corridor, it means that the Chinese support for long and the closer relations between Pakistan and China. So this is only micro example for you to give you about the geopolitical perspective about this whole initiative and project. And the Indians are now in a kind of reaction. They are trying to develop an Iranian port, Badahar, I think, that's down in, we don't have, down in the Indian Ocean. So the dynamic, I would say, give you a general answer to your question, the geopolitical dynamic now between China and India as a result of the BRI issue is going not in a very, I would say, positive direction. And and also India is closer to the US. And so generally speaking, bottom line is that the geopolitical dynamics now is not in a very positive direction, at least regarding the China and India in the region.
Lanxin, Bauer?
I can be very blunt, and this is just one view that I've heard. I was speaking on the panel on the Silk Road, on the Belt and Road this January in Paris, and there's this view that China is partnering with everyone who is not very good friend of India. This is just very blunt view, but I know it seems like that. I mean, and Pakistan is the key partner. For us, this is true that we have very little actually trading with India. I know for what reason. I mean, the flight from Almaty to Delhi is only like 2.5 hours. This could be a good partnership, but just historically we don't have much connection. I don't know why actually. I'm very interested because we are now developing this fintech, and our CEO was just a month ago in India, and we're trying to fostering some relationship on this financial technology. But going to your second question about the being mostly Chinese, I would also like to actually look at the numbers and just trying to understand what projects are considered Belt and Road and what not, because there's this self-selection problem when you say, okay, the Belt and Road, this is like something related to Chinese, the Chinese initiative, and then projects where the Chinese are investing are this Belt and Road project, but then if you look at this project, obviously they will be heavily Chinese dominated just by design, because I mean in Kazakhstan we had the $10 billion infrastructure program. I know. Is it part of Belt and Road? Is it not? I don't know. We have to decide. I know. If Greece is investing in modernizing one of its ports, is it Belt and Road or not? Because now obviously Chinese is investing in a lot of ports. So this is, for me, this question is, I can't answer it right now. This seems interesting that numbers are so high, but I would like to go back and look at the numbers and look at the mythology and how the accounting happens.
I think just quickly, there are for Central Asian Indian connectivity, there are two problems: Afghanistan and Pakistan. And I don't mean to be totally facetious. I mean, when I was interviewing elites in all 5 countries a few years ago, there was a tepid enthusiasm at the best for the U.S. Central Asia, South Asia corridor. And they are all much more enthusiastic about a corridor, particularly to get to the ocean that goes through Iran. I mean, already in 2014, there was the Kazakh-Turkmen-Iranian railway built. And it's much quicker, and there are less sort of geopolitical problems to deal with. And of course, well, particularly after the P5+1 nuclear agreement. Lanxin?
Well, the Indian-Chinese relationship actually much better than before. In the sense, you can see we were even surprised when Chinese do this Pakistan project, including Givada, the port. Modi's reaction is surprisingly modest. Surprisingly, we thought this is kind of up to the roof. No, because we had a very good mechanism which we didn't have for communication at the very top level, regular. And the issues now also, China is no longer regard Pakistan as a traditional ally against India. That phase is over. That's more a late Cold War period. What Chinese really want to do is to play these two. Of course, they're historically closer to Pakistan, but they need Pakistan more. So in this case, I don't know. When your question is how they play in Central Asia, I don't have the data to see. Indians actually compete fiercely with China in African continent, that's for sure. Now, the second question, the data, I have doubts when you say, I have to check as well. You say 90% contract goes to which project you refer to. A lot of projects, you already had a local input there, either government or their state enterprises. I don't know what data you based on, what kind of project you refer to. Yeah.
Well, I think the issue
Yeah.
is not, there's this general feeling in these areas, right? And the problem is the study now, the data you're...
You mean in Central Asia or everywhere, basically?
Just in general.
Okay,
But
yeah.
the issue is there's
Sure.
this sentiment out here. And now this study, whether whether the methodology is correct or not, is put a number on it. And the number is enormous, right? The number 89%.
Sure.
And you'll probably hear this repeated time and time again.
Right.
So this is something, regardless of what the real data is out there, right? China probably has to address it. And have they already started to take steps in that regard?
Well, sure, yes. This is exactly, as I said, they are in a learning process as well. They used to dominating every business they invest in Africa, which they did lot good to the Africans, but then Africans also reacted, including the hiring people, for example. Now Chinese are doing a lot of, adjustment in Africa. So my sense is they are beginning to learn. If you do always your way, you end up probably in some trouble. So, but I don't have a correct data in my mind.
But
so
that's true, it's probably the PR problem as well. I mean, if you regard the Belt Road project as Chinese project, obviously you will end up with very high percentage going to China. This is just how you brand yourself and what you consider to be BRI, because I don't know many people have very definite answer what project should be considered to be BRI and should not.
Right. Just a quick point about India and the China-Pakistan economic corridor.
Right.
Just to build on what you said, Lanxin. A few years ago, China has become India's largest trade partner.
Right.
So this is a significant factor that affects obviously the political and geopolitical calculations. And if you look at the actual plans for the CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, the vast majority of the projects are internal in Pakistan. Right. And if you look at the timeline, at least as it's laid out on the on the website, that this railway that would be built,
right,
linking China to Pakistan through the currently disputed territory,
right,
that is far off in the future.
Right, right.
And I think Chinese are perfectly pragmatic enough to understand that railway cannot be built unless there is an agreement of India, an agreement between India and Pakistan about the territory.
Right.
Just think about the pragmatically, who is going to ensure any traffic on that railway if it's going through disputed territory?
Right.
So,
right.
I think.
You cannot put our.
All right. This has been a really great discussion. I want to thank Lanxin, Avi, and Bauer for leading such a great discussion for us this afternoon. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, and it's that time of the day when I need to make some acknowledgments about the end of the conference. Conferences are kind of like weddings. There's so much planning that goes into them, and then suddenly the day comes, and then it's over. Well, hopefully the marriage lives happily ever after. This conference will live on because all of it has been recorded on video, and all of it will be available on the CERES website, so it will live into eternity. No, it was not on live. But
I've been politically incorrect. It's better not put me there.
Lanxin, when are you not politically correct?
Me. I said me. Just be a little careful about me. Edit it for me.
I have to be careful for you. At any rate, let me make the proper acknowledgments. First of all, I want to thank again Chevron for sponsoring the conference, and particularly Ann Conroy and Jeremy Siegel, who have been with us today. Secondly, let me thank the School of Foreign Service and Dean Heldman for supporting the conference here that CERES has put on. And then let me thank the actual people that did put on the conference. And in particular, let me start with the motor for the conference, the principal administrator at CERES, and that is, and all of you have been in contact with extensively, and that is Ali Vreeman. Ali, can you stand up, please? And working closely with Ali at CERES has been Jesse Mitchell, who is also a CERES student. And then there are a number of CERES students who've been helping us throughout the day. Rihanna Jensen, Julia Reinitz, UAE Chen, Alex Mehmet, Elisa Bernak. Thank you very much. And last and far from least, I would like to express my personal thanks to Director Angela Stent of CERES. It's a privilege and a pleasure to help Angela to make this conference as terrific as I think it was. So congratulations and thank you.